Hey everyone, it is that time of year where everything is changing out on the prairies for the season. So why don't we go try and catch up with all the staff as they're out and about in the prairies. So Vivian, how did you come to learn about prairies?
Well, I studied them in school, but there's only so much studying you can do before, and you don't really fully understand the importance and the quality of prairie habitat. So when I came to work here at Litzinger, it was really my first interaction with prairie and with the ecology of prairies. So now that I'm like immersed into the prairie life, it's just wonderful. I realize just how important this habitat is for such a wide variety of insects, wildlife, everything. And when you look at the ecology of prairie life, if you just see all these unique, like specialist bees, native insects, everything that rely on such specific habitat, it's nice to kind of walk around and see, oh, like these prairies are providing that for our native wildlife.
So Mary, when you hear the word prairie, what's that mean to you?
Prairie, okay. In the almost 20 years that I have been here, the prairie has changed dramatically. And I think that's what the prairie means to me, is a succession of plants, of animals, of insects, and so on. It used to be that we had a lot of tall goldenrod, and our volunteers, a lot of them will be viewing this, came out and we just took down as much tall goldenrod as we could because it was becoming very aggressive. We succeeded in that, and so when we succeeded in that, other areas of the prairie still had it. But over time, maybe within 2 years, the competition took that down. So I think me watching the fact that I don't have to worry a whole lot about the prairie is going to do what it needs to do to be successful, and it is very successful. Definitely progress. You can see behind me on the Joe Pye weed, all the insects and so on. If we just let nature do its thing and go through its succession the way it needs to, although we need people to come out and get the invasive species out, nature's going to come through. So I'd say the succession of plants over 20 years just amazes me, and 20 years is nothing for a prairie.
Hey Leslie, when you hear the word prairie, what does it make you think of?
What a great question, James. I think when I hear the word prairie, it makes me think of getting lost. I love to walk through the trails with the plants, super tall, and just I'm in my own little world. It really kind of reminds me of when I used to go scuba diving. I know it's really crazy to kind of put those two together, but when you've got all your scuba equipment on and you're underneath the water and you're just in this completely new world and you can't really hear anything, you kind of zone, everything kind of just fades away and you're in this zone, but there's so much going on. That's kind of how I feel, and that's what the prairie makes me think of, because when I walk through the trails by myself especially, I can just get lost, but there is so much going on. It's just amazing. So you really do have to stop and look, and I can see pollinators all the time just busy and just going crazy. And so it's just a really peaceful feeling of just kind of getting lost in a space. So that's what I think of, and that's what prairie means to me.
So Adam, when you hear the word prairie, what do you think of?
So I was born and raised in Illinois, which is nicknamed the Prairie State. But if you'd asked me growing up what a prairie was, I would have thought of an overgrown lawn or maybe an old crop field that got overtaken by weeds. And it wasn't until much later in life as an adult where I realized that prairies are actually one of the most diverse and biologically productive ecosystems on the planet. And not only are they a critically important habitat for so many plant and animal species, but this is a system that humans have depended on for many thousands of years. So when I think of prairie, I think of all this rich diversity and these complex relationships and this huge part of our natural heritage that often goes underappreciated.
So Bob, when you hear the word prairie, what does it make you think of?
In some ways, prairies are kind of one of my connections to St. Louis. I grew up in Massachusetts where prairies were this far-off, distant thing. Back in elementary school, kind of a Laurel Ingalls Wilder thing. But when I moved out here, I was a teacher. Actually, before I started working here, was a teacher partner at Litzinger. Brought my kids out. We investigated the prairie, so it was one of my first connections with St. Louis. Now it's a very cool ecosystem, great support for pollinators, and always a fun prairie burn every year. So it's become part of my St. Louis life.
So you got to investigate it right alongside the kids.
Yep.
That's awesome.
New for me and new for them.
Hi, volunteers. So James asked me what I think of when somebody mentions prairie. This is one of my favorite spots right here because this has the prairie dock, which has this really, really big leaf. This leaf isn't quite as big as it usually gets, but then right next to it is the Illinois bundle flower. And I just love to show the difference to kids in the leaf sizes. And then look at these cool seeds. I just think the seeds of the prairie are just so fascinating. The different shapes, the different colors, like right now, we've got a lot of yellow. But then we're gonna be getting into all my favorite colors, the purple, which is like my color because I was born in February. Purple's my color. And I just really love the textures, the feel, the height. Because when you go to the pasture prairie, which is where we are, the plants are so much taller than the North Prairie and the South Prairie. I know a lot of you have not come out for our Explore LREC walks, but you've got to get out here, especially now that the weather's getting a little bit cooler, and just walk around because you guys don't get to come out here at this time of the year. I mean, normally we would be out here with kids, but there's no kids, just us big kids in orange. And we really miss you and just love to just take a walk around. So email me, give me a call, let me know if you're gonna come out. Love to see you. Miss you all. Bye.
Hey James, what do you think of when you hear the word prairie? I'm so glad you asked, James. Well, I am not sure I can add much more to what everyone else has said. All I think I can add is that when I think of prairie, I think of home, I think of life. We don't have enough prairie left anymore. The Missouri Prairie Foundation says here in Missouri that less than 0.1% of prairies still exist, remnant prairies. So to me, I just think of something just so valuable, of so importance. Like I said, life. These little fragments of habitat are so important. So many different types of wildlife. I just can't help but think of them and what they are missing. And places like Litzinger, and we're reconstructing prairies. We're trying to add that little bit of life back into Missouri. So adding a little bit of life back into the state, to our home. Take, for instance, just the important things that are happening on the prairies right now. The monarchs are refueling on asters and goldenrods and sunflowers for their long migration back to Mexico. The ruby-throated hummingbirds are refueling for their long trip. The goldfinches are out by the hundreds out in the prairie right now, eating lots of seeds, getting ready for their trip. And the same for the dragonflies, just out in large swarms above the prairie, catching as many mosquitoes and other insects as they can for their trip. And then think about all of the queen bumblebees. Next year's queens are out on the prairies right now collecting nectar so they can overwinter and grow their colonies next year. Just so much relies on having big open grassland settings. I hope more people will start to see that importance, but it's hard for them to see that when they aren't around prairies. Just trying to communicate and educate people on the importance of these plants and this type of habitat is what's important to me and what I think of when I hear the word prairie. I think of life. We are all interested in what all of you think the word prairie means to you, what you think of when you hear that word. So please email Martha at the email I'm going to pop up on the screen. Boop. And you can either type it out, your response, or you can maybe email us a link to a video if you want to record yourself, and we'll share your thoughts in a future video. So we look forward to that. We look forward to hearing what prairie means to you guys. And we'll talk to you soon. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Last week, you got to hear from all of the staff about what prairie means to them. This week, we get to talk with some of the visitors to the site to see what prairie means to them. And so, Bill David, the gentleman who created the prairies here at the Litzinger Road Ecology Center 31 years ago, is who we get to hear from first, and that's a pretty special treat. He also created, before coming here 31 years ago, he created some of the prairie reconstructions out at Shaw Nature Reserve as well. So it's a really cool treat to get to hear from his perspective about what prairie means to him. And then we'll get to hear from some of the volunteers here that came and visited this week. So let's go hear what they have to say. I am here with the Bill David, who started the prairies here at the Litzinger Road Ecology Center now 31 years ago. Bill, when you hear the word prairie, what does that mean to you?
I guess I would be thinking about the first prairies we planted at the Shaw Nature Reserve in 1980. And before that, I didn't even know what a prairie was. And working with the prairie plants, starting with collecting seeds of the wildflowers and growing them in the greenhouse and planting them in the prairie, and to see the whole picture of the prairie that way. It was just a wonderful experience. When you actually work with something like that, instead of just reading about it. It just means a whole lot more to you. So later on, when I got to know prairie more, people started asking me to plant a prairie farm. And I planted 2 on Clayton Road and a 32-acre prairie up by Winfield. And it was really a good experience because each site is so different with different problems. The worst problem we ever encountered was the prairie up at Winfield. The seed we purchased must have had a little bit of Sericea lespedeza in it. And that got spread before I even knew what was happening. So that's the only real downside we ever had with prairie work. Of course, later on, my daughter became the executive director of the Missouri Prairie Foundation. That's Carol David. And going to the Prairie Foundation's outings and getting involved with Missouri prairies that way, that was another whole chapter in learning about prairie. Well,
how valuable do you think those remnant prairies those few remnant prairies that are left in Missouri, how valuable do you think those are?
They're very valuable because a lot of them have plants that you would never be able to find elsewhere. And it's important to preserve the heritage of the prairie that way. And it gives more people an opportunity to visit these prairies and learn more about it. Especially the original prairies. It's always different than the planted prairie.
Well, Bill, it looks like you actually have a guest on your shoulder.
Oh,
Let's see
okay.
here. Oh, there she goes.
Oh,
She's looks like she's thanking you for giving her a home.
what is it?
Eastern Carpenter Bee.
Oh.
So, when you hear the word prairie, what does it make you think of?
My first experience in the prairie, my first field job was working with lesser prairie chickens and monitoring them. And my first impression was the sky. Oh my gosh, there was so much sky. And it was like a feast for the senses. Stars at night, sunrises, sunsets, just the beauty, the colors, the scents on the prairie, the smells of the flowers, and the birds, goldfinches, lesser prairie chickens, so many different types of birds.
Hi, I'm Sarah Wilson, and when I hear the word prairie, I think of wonder and curiosity, diversity. This is like a picnic for all the senses to come here. So it's a treat, and I love it here.
When I hear the word prairie, what does it make me think of? Well, of course I think about summer, and I think about the tall plants and the different colors of flowers and the pollinators and the birds and just the diverse populations throughout the prairie. But my favorite thing about the prairies at the Ecology Center, because they're the only real prairies I've ever been around, and I grew up in Missouri, I think about the wintertime. I love the different colors of browns and the dried up plants that you can shake some of the seed pods and it makes a little rattle sound. I love the different textures that there are in the winter. I love the smells. I like to just go out and stand in a spot and close my eyes and just take a deep breath, and I would bottle that smell if I could. It's my favorite. So that's what I think of when I think of prairies.
Pardon the construction noise in the background, but we got a couple responses back in text about what prairie means to some of our friends, and I thought I would read those to you. From one of our teacher partners, Peggy Knock, she says, "I give up." Apparently, she was probably thinking about what the answer was for a little bit. But she says, I give up. Prairie means an abundance to me of plants, animals, and learning opportunities. That's a great one. And then from Jerry Lehman, prairies. When I think of prairies, I wonder what Lewis and Clark would have seen in 1803. Lewis reported seeing vast expanses of prairies and bison as far as they could see. I wonder if they were able to capture the beauty of the prairies when they reported back to Thomas Jefferson. Yes, so in their journals that are available online, I couldn't find any really kind of great descriptions, that really go into detail. Maybe they're out there. I just couldn't find it. But I did find, and give me a moment here, a great quote from just a few years later, from 1811, from a explorer of the area, Henry Murray Brackenridge. And his description here, which I find quite beautiful, was when he was standing on a bluff in St. Charles, and here's how it goes here. Before me, I could mark the course of the Mississippi, its banks without even a fringe of wood. To the left, we behold the ocean of prairie, with islets at intervals. The whole extent perfectly level, covered with long waving grass, and at every moment changing color from the shadows cast by the passing clouds. In some places, there stands a solitary tree, a cottonwood or walnut of enormous size, but from the distance diminished to a shrub. 100,000 acres of the finest land are under the eye at once, and yet in all this space there is but one little cultivated spot to be seen. So at that point in time, most of the prairies hadn't been tilled under yet, or plowed under yet. And I just thought that was a really nice quote to kind of give you an idea of what Thomas Jefferson and Meriwether Lewis might have seen at that point in time.
Hi, I'm Pat. When I think of the prairie, I think of tall plants and lots of bumblebees. The time I saw the deer running through the prairie, and I always hope to see that again.
My name is Chuck Wilson, and when I think of the word prairie, it reminds me of the first time I set foot on this property. I had the good fortune of landing here late July one year. And for me, a prairie was probably a dusty trail that the wagon trains took, where there was an absence of vegetation. And I was just so blown away by the colors, the diversity, and just the incredible quantity of plant life and animal life that was contained in the prairie. A lot of times when I think about the prairie, I think when I come here, I'll look at it from 200 feet away. It'll make me want to get to 100 feet away. And if I'm lucky and have the time, I'll get down on the ground in the prairie and I'll look. And at that point, I experience something that people don't understand about knowledge. And that is that the power of direct observation, learning something by looking at something, is a unique way of learning things, different from anything else.
I'm Diane D. When I hear the word prairie, of course, I think of Little House on the Prairie. When I'm with the children here, I'll say, do you ever go to the grocery store? And they say yes. I say, well, this is a grocery store for all kinds of creatures, and they don't have to pay.
Hi, I'm Allison Asme, and when I think of the word prairie, think of prairies, I think of childhood. I grew up in Kansas, and I remember taking trips over and driving through the Tallgrass National Prairie Preserve, and before I knew anything about prairies, it just made a big impact on me as a child, so that's what I think about.
Hi, I'm Mary Woodward, and I'm a horticulturist and volunteer educator here at LREC. And when I think of prairie, I think of a sanctuary of ever-changing colors throughout the seasons.
Hi, my name's Lynn Good. I'm a volunteer educator. When I think of prairie, I think of a flat area that's a thicket of plants without trees. They're usually about half as tall as me or taller, and up to taller, and a lot of insects. And I also have this sense of there's a whole lot going on down in there that I can't see, and I wish I was a little critter so I knew.
Hi, I'm Charlie Wilson, and I'm a volunteer at the Litzinger Road Ecology Center. And when I think of the word prairie, I think of the Litzinger Road Ecology Center. We have 3 of the most beautiful and alive prairies that anyone would ever see, or they are just beautiful and alive. So when I think of prairie, I think of Litzinger.
So Stacy, when you hear the word prairie, what's it make you think of?
So when I hear the word prairie, I think of native plants and the variety of plants that are available to be planted. It's, you know, just looking out across this prairie, I'm just so excited every time I come by it because I enjoy all the variety of plants that are in there. When I first started working at Litzinger, I had no clue that there were so many native plants. I grew up in a farming community where a lot of the land that you saw was full of corn and beans, and there wasn't a lot of native plants per se. And so when I hear the word prairie, I think of a lot of beautiful flowers that insects can enjoy and butterflies can flock to, and that's one of my favorite parts is, you know, seeing the living creatures that enjoy the prairie.
Well, if you made it this far, I know you really enjoy prairies. I don't know about you guys though, but I really enjoyed hearing everybody's different perspectives on what prairie means to them. From perhaps having an early childhood experience with prairies, to having some kind of emotional connection when you are finally in a prairie, to having never been around a prairie and having this misconception of what a prairie was until you moved to St. Louis or somewhere else in the Midwest, and seeing a prairie for that very first time. Let's say even the ones at Litzinger. I really enjoyed hearing all those experiences. And if you would still like to share your experience, it's not going to become a video, but if you would like to share that experience with me still, I'd more than love to hear it. And no, it'll just stay between the two of us. So you can go ahead and email me that if you'd like. But I thought I would share some extra reading that you can do if you are really wanting to dig deeper into prairie history and prairie ecology. But just want to give you a couple recommendations. So this one, can't highly recommend this one enough. Pre-Settlement Prairie of Missouri by Walter Schroeder. This is, well, this was released by the Missouri Department of Conservation years ago. It's out of print, but you should be able to find PDFs of it online for free. But this is some of the first, really good accounts of how far spread prairie was in Missouri. And it's this document that we actually know that the tallgrass prairies in the St. Louis area actually did come into the Brentwood area along Deer Creek. And this is put together from early surveys. So that's how we know prairie actually did come into our area. So these are true prairie reconstructions at the Litzinger Road Ecology Center. Alright, so that's a must read in my opinion. If you want to dig a little bit deeper into understanding of Missouri's prairies, this one right here, The Terrestrial Natural Communities of Missouri by Paul Nelson, also out of print, but you should be able to find this online for sale or get it from the library. And I don't know, I never heard of it before very recently, but Susan recommended this one to me. Common Fields, An Environmental History of St. Louis. This one was by the Missouri Historical Society Press. Goes into all kinds of information about St. Louis, and it talks about the pre-settlement prairie information from Walter Schroeder in here as well. But it goes into all kinds of environmental history here in St. Louis. And if you want to get into some good history of the area and the prairies, if you're a history buff and you love Lewis and Clark kind of stuff, of course there's the Lewis and Clark journals, which should be available online for free too in PDF forms. I've found them that way. But the prologue to Lewis and Clark, the McKay and Evans expeditions. So this was a few years prior to Lewis and Clark going out, and some interesting information here locally, more specifically locally in Missouri, Schoolcraft's Ozark Journal. So 1818 to 1819. This is Schoolcraft's journey in southern Missouri and Arkansas. Very good book. And if you're wanting to get into prairie reconstruction or restoration work, you gotta read this one, the Tallgrass Restoration Handbook. Basically for people like Adam and myself, this is the kind of the Prairie Bible. The information in here is really in depth about start to finish in maintaining prairie reconstructions and restorations. Just tons and tons of information. Well, and that's it, guys. Again, I really enjoyed talking with everyone about this and hearing everybody's perspectives, and I hope you guys did too. And I will talk to you soon. See you guys.